Dave Sobel has become a staple in our industry. He produces a podcast every day with three stories. I think it's six minutes, less than 6 or 7 minutes, 2 to 3 stories every business day about the tech industry, Business of Tech podcast. It's a must listen to. He goes through a lot of stories. He picks two or three. He's been doing it for almost 3 years now. It's become a mainstay. I've had the pleasure of knowing Dave a long time. I ask him great questions, of course, about small businesses involved with technologies, um, managed service providers, how vendors work with them. We also talk about NFTs and where that is going in the industry. We talk about supporting infrastructure and moving it to information. And I also get a little personal with Dave as to how we work, how disciplined he thinks he is, and what motivates him, and how he values success. But his advice to MSPs, in this current day and time where we are, is very, very unique. I was surprised by it, but really, really liked it. I know you're going to enjoy it. And also, how vendors can help them was a very different take, too. Love Dave. He's just one of the smartest guys I know, very confident, never arrogant. Podcast is a must listen to. You're going to enjoy this conversation with Dave Sobel. Thanks for listening. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz. People ask me, how did I lose 130 pounds? The quick answer is always discipline. I started my business, wasn't paying attention to my health, was eating too much, drinking too much sweets. My daughter was born. Next thing I know, I'm pre-diabetic. I have hypertension. I knew something had to change. Discipline. I, like many of you, have faced many challenges in your career, in your family, in your life, in your faith. How did you attack them? How did you approach them? How did you solve them, hopefully? It all had to have some degree of discipline. I'm also asked, how did you found and start a tech business? And it lasted over 25 years. Discipline. I was committed to it, enjoyed technology, didn't enjoy some aspects of it, but knew it was necessary. Discipline. Our podcast mission, how do we use discipline to better ourselves and society? Join me, please, as I talk to interesting people and discuss how they use discipline in their family and their passion and their careers and how it helped them. Our podcast vision, growth through learning from others. Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. It'll be light and serious. Join us, please. Thank you for consideration. And I think, thanks for your time today, Dave. Great to see you. You continue to do great work. Listen to you every day. So is it a great time now to be an MSP?
Yes and no. So the answer is like, look, if I put my like vendor sales hat on, of course it's an amazing time, right? Like, and all and I was just literally working on show data recently, and like IT spending is up. The need is there. The investments are up. The largest growth per some new tech data is around IT services itself, like the actual services. So there's this element of like, oh yeah, there really is opportunity. But on the flip side, it's really hard. Like, it is way harder to be in the delivery of IT services than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I mean, I started my MSP 20 years ago.
Me too.
That was a way easier business to start than one right now, because not only can I start off with the scary, like, cybersecurity, you have to know everything and be right all the time to protect your customers against these attacks, but then on top of that, technology has moved beyond just complex to be truly complicated, because we're talking about linking so many systems together. You have all these cloud systems, you have all these endpoints to pull together to make the systems work together. It is way more complicated than it's ever been before. And so it's a lot. You've got to know a lot, be a lot, offer a lot. It's not just a matter of hanging out your shingle and you're instantly in this space.
Yeah, because when we started, We used to haul hardware into a closet, and not only into our own closet, but into the client's closet. That's certainly gone now. We used to have, you know, Microsoft Exchange engineers when mail went down. Certainly, you don't need that anymore.
Well, but I even like to think back and look at the so we think about the number of end devices per user was
Hmm.
what, one? Like
Right.
maybe two, right? Like
Right.
like you didn't have the mobile space, you didn't have Internet of Things, you didn't have all of that level of complexity. You didn't have the threat level of connecting something to the internet was instant death, like from the device getting taken over. Uh, the biggest thing you worried about was I was quipped like Janice in accounting deleting something and you had to
Right.
get that back, right? As opposed to now where not only will a mistake potentially cause the loss of loss of productivity, but oh by the way, the attackers may hold you hostage.
Hmm.
So like the risks are so much bigger and the complexity is so much more, and that's where it's just harder. Now, at the same time, there's more money in it. There's more opportunity. There's more need for it. There's a much greater investment by business owners in technology. Again, if we think back, imagine if the pandemic had happened in 2002.
Hmm.
Technology wise, we would have been in a horrible place, right?
Yeah.
We society would have shut down in ways that we were not at all prepared for. Whereas I'm not saying I do not want to make light of what we have all been through and continue to go through. But if I compare against the way the scenario would have played out 20 years ago, it is very different and it is much better. So I look at this and say I want to be kind of a realist the way I approach the space. And too often times everyone goes like, well, is it a great time? And the answer is like, oh, it's amazing. We're all gonna
Hmm.
make tons of money. And it's like, let's actually have a realistic conversation to say, yeah, there's opportunity here, but the reason it is because it's hard. Like
Hmm.
in complexity is the opportunity, and I want to link the two together.
It's a very valid point. 20 years ago, we had to kind of paint the picture of, imagine you get attacked through your network. I know it's a crazy thing to consider, but it may happen, and you don't need to have that kind of discussion anymore.
Right. It's assumed, and actually in a way we've almost over rotated on that problem where it's like, well, it's just going to happen,
Right. It's not when,
which
it's
is
if.
actually a realistic stance. This is
Right.
it's going to happen. You should just assume it will. Uh, as opposed to being this theoretical thing. And in fact, I mean, if I look at the enterprise, 90% of enterprises have had some kind of cyber attack. This isn't a
Right.
theory, it's something that actually legitimately happens all the time.
It's funny. I just drew the analogy. We used to say that about hard drives. Back then when we were, the hard drive, it's going to fail. We just don't know when. So you should have RAID, right? You should have redundancy. And now, of course, there's none of that conversation at all.
Well, that there certainly is in certain sectors. Like
Mm.
I want to be very deliberate and say like the guys who run the data center are having
Mm.
very complicated discussion about the way they're running their physical hardware to reduce failure. Right? Like I
Mm.
there are segments of the industry that are very focused on that. But for the average user, like first off, let's just observe hard drives don't really have moving parts the way they used to.
Right.
It's not a
No.
spindle with a little
No.
reader. Now it's a non-moving piece that reduces the complexity, and we also have all of these other ways of managing data. Like I think about now how tied I was to my device 20 years ago, 25 years ago when I took my first job and I was issued this 40-pound laptop. uh, if something happened to that, it was just such a critical disaster, right? Like because
Right.
my stuff was on that, and that was the way that I did it. Now, I'm actually planning a trip later in the month, and I'm literally just building another disposable device where I'm just like, oh well, if this one gets stolen, that's okay. That's what it's for, and I'll just restore everything out of the cloud and be fine. And it's just this very different way of thinking about the problem. And so look, I got into technology because I like solving problems with this stuff. I like this space for a reason. I just want to be realistic about talking about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Very valid. And the move from infrastructure support to information support. Can you talk about that? You think it's realistic and inevitable?
Well, for me, it is absolutely 100% the direction this is going to go. Um, if I think about the true need for most small to mid-sized businesses, which is really the lens that I always try and put on it, is they need help with managing their business and the information that's flowing through it, and the devices themselves matter a whole lot less. The
Hmm.
physical infrastructure, the stuff that makes it up, is way less important than the system and the data itself. And for me, that's where the interesting bit is. I do my daily show, The Business of Tech, and I'm constantly talking about news around there. And I'm fascinated by the change in work and the change in the way people are using it, because I think there's so much opportunity here versus the like, I'm just going to keep the lights on approach of quote unquote infrastructure. There's a certain assumption that just infrastructure should just happen now. But also, the interesting stuff is in that area of work and how information flows and how people use it. And can you give them the right information at the right time with the right access in a way that they need it and present it in a usable way? Like, that stuff is just way more interesting to me. Oh, and by the way, interesting, often code for complicated and worth making money off
Hmm.
of, which is why I like it.
Hmm. And do you think the shift from infrastructure to information is similar from the shift from on-prem to cloud?
Yes, and it's been enabled by that.
Mm.
One of the things that gets overlooked on this is that cloud allows for so much more. I always describe it as that it's a better spend. A
Mm.
lot of people that were initially thinking about cloud and looking at that always went and said like, "Oh, it's going to save money." We've never sold technology ever where we take less of your money. We always take more of your money. Like, let's just every industry is like this, right? It's always cheaper, faster, but it's never really cheaper. What I really
Right.
mean by that is we're spending your money better. You get a lot more when you put something in the cloud versus what you might have put that on infrastructure. So the tying it by getting more, we're now capable of doing more, and I want to tie that more to the outcomes. Like, what can now we do and make your business better? I like to spend a lot of my time thinking about
Hmm.
the business owner, the business leader, who's measured on some kind of outcome, right? Increasing revenue, usually the best one. And what does that mean? It could mean driving more sales. It could be recruiting more customers. It could be more if you're like an not for profit, recruiting more membership, more drive. Like, it always means something in terms of the business. And how do we link that back to how do we do that with some technology?
Yeah, it's quantifiable.
The
Yeah,
people that can quantify it are the ones that are going to make piles of cash. Like, let
that's
me just
right.
call that out. Because, by the way, when I go to a business owner and I say, hey, if you spend this amount of money, which results, like, let's link it, which is roughly 5% of revenue, but I can help you grow 20% on revenue. Every business owner is going to say, yes, please keep ringing that machine as often as you need to help me grow 20% if I'm spending 5% to make the 20%, right? If I tell you that if you spend $1 and you make four, you're going to keep pulling the lever on that machine as many times as you possibly can, right? That's the sweet spot of technology, when I can say, by doing this, I drive this outcome, and thus it links back to your business. Now, by the way, I'll freely admit most IT people are not good at talking this way, and they're not
Mm.
good about linking that back. They always want to talk about the what we're going to spend and what's going to cost, and they're not very good at linking it back to, let's talk about what we're going to do in the business.
That's very interesting. You have to spend a certain amount. I was talking to Jay McBain, of course, we know from Forrester, and he was saying, in the M&A space, when these technology companies get acquired, uh, if they don't spend a certain percent, whatever it's a 5%, 10% on cybersecurity, they're not attractive in their acquisition. They have to devote that X amount to the protection of themselves to be attractive for acquisition. I mean, that's where we've gotten to this point. Does that
Well,
shock you
they
at all?
No, because there's an element of like if you're not spending enough on it, you don't value it correctly, and
Right.
you're not actually protecting the crown jewels. I talk all the time about this idea of I want to protect the crown jewels
Hmm.
of my business. Like that's the way that I think about the investment in cybersecurity. Like I oftentimes link it back to sort of personal approaches on things. I'm like super paranoid about backups. I think I run 4 or 5 backups on every one of my systems.
Do you really?
Like, yeah, well, yeah, because I'm in the intellectual property business.
Right.
I'm in the business of selling information out there, and like I overcompensate. Why? Because I'm freaking paranoid. If something happens to my information and I can't get it back, I stop making money. And I like
Mm.
paying my mortgage. I like
Do you?
eating. like,
You're
I like
selfish,
the
Dave.
right. I like the basics of my life, right?
Yeah.
And so I look at it and say, I want to protect that stuff. So I put some money into protecting it. And by the way, I always quip and say, like, look, hackers, if you're listening to this, please, I'm not trying to make myself a target. I just know I'm
Mm.
super paranoid. Like,
Mm.
it's not a challenge. Like, I know I can be defeated on this. I just want to make it so that I have invested enough that I can do something in the event that something happens. And I look at it from that perspective. So Jay would be 100% right on this. Like one of the things to look at is are they spending enough on protecting their own assets? If they're not, we know how much they value those assets.
Yeah. I back up too. I think the three different, like two different clouds and something local. But yeah, I do get paranoid about that. Talk to me about NFTs, Dave?
So I am not into the whole crypto space, right? Like I want to acknowledge what I think is going on there at kind of a society level and then talk about it. Like if I think that what's happening is that people are looking for new ways to have volatile assets in the market, right?
Mm.
Particularly if you're younger, you're looking for ways to put your resources in to have that money work for you. And the way society has chosen to run things right now, we protect a lot of existing assets. We have done a lot of moves economically that protect those that already have wealth. Well, the way you get wealth is you take advantage of volatility and you exploit that, right? Like
Mm.
that's how we all started. Was we found an opportunity, we found something that was kind of crazy and risky, and we put some effort or money or investment there, and that's how we were able to achieve some level of wealth. Well, if you're younger, a lot of those things are not available to you anymore because they've been protected by society, by regulation, by those that have those that have the wealth are doing their bit to protect it. So I think there's this element of creating new spaces that is being explored by some of this. Now, I don't buy into the way NFTs are kind of being created right now because I think there's just a little too much ridiculousness to them, and I actually don't really think they've captured what the vision of the asset is. Let me tell you what I mean by that. What they're trying to parallel to is this idea of art, right? Like if you've got like a non-fungible token is something that you can declare that you own this one unique thing. And it is similar to rarer assets like gold or like art, like a Picasso or something that is a very unique thing. Now, I understand the uniqueness of a piece of art. I can physically understand it. There is only one of it. It is unique. I can own it. But the way my perception of the way NFTs are being put together is well, you sort of own it. You own like a receipt saying you own it as opposed to actually owning it.
Mm.
Because with a digital asset, of course, there is no difference between my not NFT version of that image versus your I own the image. And we just
Mm.
all have to agree that the person that has bought this thing electronically actually owns the original. But my copy is not any different. Like it kind of falls down unless we all agree to the collective hallucination. And I'm just sort of not ready to buy into the collective hallucination because I just don't see it yet as truly the unique thing that they're trying to portray it as, but I totally understand the economic driver to create a market with some volatility in it. And so that's where it's interesting to me. Like, I know the problem they're trying to solve, and I'm on board with that. I just don't quite think this is the actual solution.
What do you think the solution is?
There'll be further versions of this that make a little bit more sense.
I see.
That make that actually are a little bit more sort of tangible to the way digital assets will work. And I think what in a way we have to sort of solve smart contracts perhaps, and we need to start do I do believe, like in digital money, I think the idea of that is an inevitable thing. I just sort of think we're potentially a little early on this NFT thing, and it's kind of version 0.2 versus it actually being one. But I get the desire to try, and I get the interest in it being kind of a volatile thing. So I'm sympathetic, but I don't buy in yet.
So the idea is we make the actual, so this podcast, for example, correct? We could put an NFT on it and the original will be owned by whoever purchases it, but there can be copies of it that people will have and it'll be exactly the same, except for just won't have that NFT
Yeah, and
certification.
this is where like it kind of falls down, because I could make a pretty solid argument that, well, Joe, you own this, right? You
Right.
put a copyright on it. Like, we have a system of an asset. And yeah, we haven't quite built a way of proving that. But this is where I go, yeah, but I don't think the NFT thing is really what you think it is. Right? Like, it's like it kind of falls down. And unless we kind of have a collective agreement to the way that's done, I guess I said, I just don't buy in yet. And I guess it falls down a little bit for me because, like, one of the ways that you protect assets is by having a way of justifying and protecting that again we all agree on. But because of the distributed nature of this and the way that they're trying to put it all together, well, there is no central authority, right? That's theoretically the argument. Well, how do I defend my rights in a way that works for us as society if I need to defend my rights? And if there's no way of doing that, it just, again, it falls down a little bit. And there's all these elements where, NFTs have been stolen recently, right? So there's this argument, people have had their NFTs stolen, right? And then the argument is well, you mispriced it, or you misrepresented it, and well, there is no way of rectifying that because that's what happens on the blockchain. It's a Yeah, but then it's not solving my actual ownership rights,
Mhm.
right? And so, again, I get it. Like, I get where we're going directionally. I just look at this and say, I don't think it's quite there yet.
But meanwhile, there's artists like, Beeple, who puts out different artist piece every day, who's made hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yep. Right. Because there are some people that have decided this will have this level of value. And by the way,
Mm.
I am always going to compliment an artist or a creator or an business owner who goes
Mhm.
out there and finds a way to make money. So I do not begrudge somebody like Beeple taking money for their creation of their art. What I actually question is the buyer saying, "You really think you're going to make your money back on that?"
Right.
Like, real, because it's only worth $69 million for somebody who paid it. If you can't sell it again for that value, it is not worth that anymore. It was worth that. It is no longer worth that. It's only worth what a potential buyer would pay now. And I don't buy it for $69 million. Like, I just don't think that continues to go up in value that way.
Yeah, I know. When I was young, I'm sure when you were young, you had friends who had baseball cards and comic books. And yeah, my Reggie Jackson, minor league is worth $10,000. I was like, yeah, but it's worth that. But who will pay for that? It's not worth anything until somebody's actually going to pay that amount.
Oh, it's funny that you bring up, because I mean, I was a comic book collector
Yeah.
growing up. I actually still have all of my comic books as a kid,
Wow.
right? I'm a video game collector now, right? Like, I have everyone knows who's been seen my show. I've got retro gear around
Yeah.
me. Like I actually have cataloged it in both my comic book collection, my video game collection are cataloged,
Huh.
and it is only worth what I could sell it to a
Right.
buyer as.
Mm.
And I know that. And like my comic book collection, most of it worthless
Right.
because I know no one will buy it. There is no market for that. I could declare it's worth some crazy amount of money, but it's not. My video game collection, most of it not worth much money. There are
Mm.
certain pieces that are valuable because there's a rarity to them and they are trading currently on open market at a certain value,
Wow.
thus the value. And that's where I look at this NFT thing and I go, yeah, I get it, but unless the market proves that that exchange is always possible, it isn't actually worth that.
Hmm. So the ultimate question, Dave, will MSPs or even small business owners ever be able to use NFTs to make money to help their clients?
NFTs specifically, probably not. Some of the underlying technologies, I actually do think will be something.
Hmm.
I as I said, I'm a big believer in digital money. I think it's coming, right? I think it's incredibly logical to me the idea of the U.S. government putting out a digital dollar.
Hmm.
I think it's just inevitable. I think it's just a matter of time, and it will be traded the same way Bitcoin is, right? The same way the dollar is, because it's a digital version of that. There
Hmm.
are so many reasons why that makes sense to me, both technologically, but also politically and from societal reasons. So that will run on a blockchain. It will have elements of the same core technologies, and by the way, we'll all use it, right? Like our phones will connect to it and we'll be able to use the digital dollar versus the regular dollar. They'll be linked. And so, to your question, do I think MSPs, SMBs will use it? Yeah, totally. There'll be versions of this stuff that just happens. I think smart contracts are a completely reasonable thing that will happen. I think it will be, you'll be able to track ownership of things like homes and office buildings and cars and that kind of stuff. Will have a digital version of titling that we use now because it makes incredible amounts of sense to me that you want to have these records trackable. I think we'll use it in smart things like backups. Like I've actually I'm talking to a vendor right now who's talking about the idea of using immutable storage and using the blockchain to make sure that your backups can't get corrected or get
Wow.
corrupted. I mean, and you can always roll back. And so you look and say, well, is that using an NFT? Well, probably not by its raw definition, but if you're using all the component technologies,
Hmm.
good enough for me, right? So I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff in this. I'm just not entirely convinced this is exactly the implementations. But again, I totally want to acknowledge that I get the problem they're trying to solve,
Hmm.
and sometimes you have to experiment, and the market has to play it all out, and there's a bunch of risk here, and hey, that's healthy. That's capitalism, right? I love it. I want the ideas to go out there and fight for dominance, and something will win. But that also means there are going to be some losers. Like there's going to be some losers on this.
Hmm. Yeah, very. Let's talk about the blockchain itself. I mean, the big criticism is that it's not environmentally, good. It takes a lot of resources. What are your thoughts on just the blockchain technology itself?
Yeah, it's early. It's not done. They definitely need to work on that. It's
Mm.
I think we've got, and this is where I sort of say like my expertise is not in blockchain. It is not in the depths of this, and so I don't want to get into like a kind of religious battle with the blockchain people over this.
Mm.
Uh, what I observe always is that for technologies to truly take off, they've got to be simplified in a way that is manageable, implementable, and usable by most people. And we are not at that level yet.
Right.
It is too complicated. It is too difficult. It comes with too many costs. Just the creation of NFTs themselves is very
Mm.
expensive. And until you solve those problems, you're not going to have widespread adoption. And again, this is where you sort of like you look at this and you say like, oh, everyone's talking about all these spaces. Yeah, but I can go look at other things that are way more boring and say they are much larger areas of interest to me. Everyone talks about the numbers of these. It's measured in the, like, hundreds of thousands of people trading this kind of stuff, not tens of millions where some other technologies are. And for the ones that are going to get widespread adoption, I'm looking to that.
Yeah, very well said. So, given where we are just in the calendar, what we talked about today, just technology wise and direction wise, what advice do you have for MSPs, Dave Sobel?
So mine's kind of a funny one. Like, if I actually think the big thing that I think about for 2022 for most MSPs is, I think you devalue your consultancy too much. And I think we want to think more like consultants. Uh, Consultants make money for being really smart, and they get
Mm,
paid for their good advice and good direction. Oftentimes it is not quite considered as sexy for some, because perhaps it's viewed too much as trading time for money.
mm,
That's just the way you sell consultancy. Like, it is you can sell a consultancy in a managed service. You can bundle it all up. I want most MSPs to spend more time valuing their advice more than anything else. Think back to everything that we've just talked about, right? These are hard problems solved by thinking it through and
right.
delivering customized advice to business owners. That's way more important to me than your bronze, silver, tin, copper, whatever plan, or all of those other things. You delivering good advice to your customers that helps them be effective is the most important thing you do. And most of the time, you don't lead with that, talk about that, spend most of your time on it. Like, it is devalued. So for me, that's the area that I think is the most relevant. And by the way, it's the smartest thing you can do with your time in a cloud world, which
Mm,
is what we live in now. If not the completely inevitable, everything will be cloud by 2025 figures that I see all the time as an
mm.
analyst.
The term trusted advisor. Do you like it?
Everybody says it.
Yeah.
I'm not into these things that everybody says and doesn't deliver. It's Go do it. Go actually be a trusted advisor. Stop talking about being one. I don't know, the people that are most impressive in my mind tend to also be the most humble about things, and are
Mm,
the ones that are oftentimes quiet about these things. They're not running around bragging about being the trusted advisor. They're just moving mountains by stuff happening. Do that. It's,
mm,
if you spend all your time having to tell everybody you're the trusted advisor, maybe you're not as much of a trusted advisor as you think you are.
yeah. Yeah, and when you speak, like you mentioned it, you alluded to it once before. A lot of technicians don't speak in a consultative manner, right? Quantifying things and being able to speak in a business sense. What was the Einstein quote? If you can't explain it to a 12-year-old, you don't know it at all, or something like
Right.
that.
It's, I look, I never sit over here claiming to be the smartest at all this stuff. I
Mm,
just try and spend a lot of time thinking about it, and
mm,
I try and give some perspective on it. And you ask my opinion of it. It's
yes.
come from a bunch of reading and a bunch of expertise, like not necessarily like raw expertise in everything. It's the, like, well, I read a lot, I ask a lot of questions, and I understand the things I know and the things I don't know so much, and I listen to smart people, and I try and pull that information together. That has incredible value.
Mm,
And if I and we've been both doing this for a long time. You talk to most people in technology, they're not actually talking about that level of skill. They're talking about what vendor they sell, or what toolkit
mm,
they use, or what, like the stuff that isn't the important bit of actually having the insights and the knowledge to do stuff with it. And that's, as I said, like, if you're looking for me for the biggest thing to spend time on, be a better consultant. It's not a bad thing. It's actually a really good thing. And it's super valuable on all of the things we talked about: cloud, world of work kind of type stuff. Like, just giving good advice, That's where it's at.
Yeah, and not to beat a dead horse here, but the the value over features. So many times we're just, well, it does this, and you click that, it does that. No, not so much about the features, but what's the true value you're delivering.
Right. And and if you're able to to translate that, then you are incredibly valuable, right?
Right.
And by the way, hard, not saying it's
Yeah.
easy. Not everyone's saying like, and it takes continual practice.
Yeah.
It's all of these stories of the, you drive to the auto dealer, right? And he comes in, you drive your car in, it's got a problem, and guy walks up, touches this one thing, and all of a sudden your problem goes away, right? And he
Mm,
charges you $500, and you're like, well, but it only took you 2 seconds, and you're like, yeah, but it took 20 years
right.
to have the expertise to know exactly what to touch, and now your car is fixed. The expertise is what's important, much more than the feature, the function. It's the expertise.
Very good, Dave. And it requires a pivot. So if we pivot now to vendors, is it the same advice you're going to give to vendors that work with MSPs and SMBs? Do they have to be more consultative?
So my answer is kind of split. Interestingly,
Hmm.
the answer is yes, but also no. Uh, where I find there's a really interesting vendor gap is, look, most vendors can't spend they're not going to be able to train their entire staff to understand everything about the way their customers work. Their MSPs, the IT providers, their partners, they're their customers, right? They you can't train every single one of your salespeople to completely be intimate on every little bit about about your business. And ultimately, actually, my advice is sometimes just be honest about what your widget does.
Hmm.
Like, understand that the most important thing you can do is explain what your widget does and how it fits in to the larger context. I counsel so many vendors all the time who try to jump to consulting, right? And they all sound the same. Well,
Hmm.
we're going to help you increase revenues, and we're going to help you cut costs, and we're going and I read these ads, and I read these messages to quote unquote to the channel, and I'm like, they're all the same. They're all saying exactly the same thing. Grow your revenue with us. Solve your customers' problems. Like, okay, you've now glossed over the difficulty. Sometimes I just want to know what your widget does,
Hmm.
because I'm the consultant, I'm the expert. I'm trying to assemble all of these bits into some kind of solution. If I just know what your widget does, I know how it fits into the rest of the widgets I've got to all assemble. But never lose sight of the fact that your customers, your quote unquote partners, are in the business of being consultants. So, yes, you should try and figure out ways to be consultative with them. But no, that's really hard. And don't gloss over, just sometimes you need to explain what your widget does.
Hmm. Yeah, just that, and that would go a long way. That would go a long way because oftentimes they don't really understand how an MSP works. And they start making some assumptions and start doing, well, if you just tell me what your product does, let me see how I can fit it into my puzzle. It's a very good
Right.
advice.
Yeah. It just be really clear about that. I tease all the time. Like, there's so many of these vendors that do these 40 and 50-minute webinars, right?
Right,
Where all I really needed was the 30 seconds where they explained their widget.
right.
But I have to sit through 40 minutes of them pontificating about the market and all that other stuff, which they don't really understand because it's 4 levels down on the person they've trained to be the presenter, who doesn't actually have any practical experience, has never really done any of this stuff, just is reading from a script. But I have to sit through all of this to get to the 30 seconds of what your widget does. uh, Sometimes I just want to know what your widget does. Help me out there.
It's that simple. And it also occurred to me, Dave. We've talked before on air, and certainly uh, we've known each other for a long time. And the podcast has just an overall theme of discipline. I lost a lot of weight, and people always ask me how I do it, like it's a magic secret. I just say discipline. I don't know if I've ever asked you, Dave. Do you consider yourself a disciplined person?
Uh, I actually, so the answer is my wife would say I am.
Really?
I actually consider myself a lazy person.
Hmm.
Uh, and what I mean by that is I like systems and process to do the least possible to meet my goals.
Hmm.
And so I'm lazy from the perspective of I spend a lot of time thinking about that. I do have good discipline in that I follow systems because I know they're very effective for me. but I also know that that allows me to remove complexity from my own execution. So, so for example, I too, I mean, I actually need to do it again because I've been a little slack, but I've lost weight a couple of times on this, right? And I'm back up a little bit. And all I do is I just do the Weight Watchers app,
Hmm.
and I'm just super disciplined about like doing it. But the other thing I know about myself is that it's also a certain element of laziness.
Hmm.
That I will do what the system tells me because I know it is the fastest way to get to my goal. If my goal is to lose some weight, the simplest thing to do is follow the system that will outline exactly what I need to do without spending a ton of time thinking about it, and then I win in the long run. Uh, so it's kind of two part maybe. I think I am practically very disciplined, but I view it much more as a laziness element.
Interesting take. And when you had your MSP, did you consider were you more disciplined then than you are now?
No, and the answer is because I've gotten a lot smarter and
Mm.
more educated about the value of the things even that I've preached over time.
Hmm.
You know, I'm always realistic about my own MSP. I started my MSP when I was like 26 years old.
Right.
You know, and I sold it right around when I was 36 or so. And it's, you know, and I'm very proud of it. But I also don't sit here and say like, oh, it's the greatest thing in the world. It was like, well, no, it's a successful regional MSP, right? It was, and I did what every entrepreneur does, and it's happy to do, is I sold it at the end. Uh, you'll note I'm still retired or still working, right? I didn't
Right.
retire. Like, so
Right.
it wasn't that successful. It was successful enough. Uh, but I also had all of the things of I was in my 20s. I was learning, I was still learning a lot. I'm still learning a lot now, and I'm much better about understanding the things that I don't understand now versus the way that I was then. And so I look at it from that perspective and say, was I this disciplined? No, I was way messier. Uh, was it better than the average bear? Probably.
Mm.
You know, but I also like to try and be realistic about the way that I view those times.
But now with the business of tech, I mean, you're putting out, two, three stories a day, every business day. That takes incredible, resolve and discipline.
And I love it. I'm having the
I
most
mean,
fun I've had in
you're great
ages.
at
And
it. Yeah.
well, thank you because I loved. I'm having so much fun doing it. I love to read and I love to learn, and this gives me an excuse to spend like 2 hours a day reading.
Wow.
It's so awesome. Like every day, I get to consume all of this cool information and think about it and parse it. Like it's great fun to for me to do this and to read the stories and then try and recognize patterns, try and look and say like what's important, what's not. You know, and I flirt. I'm working. I always am working on like what can I do with other information. Like I may start doing a segment like the story I rejected, right? Like because there's always like one every week where I'm like, it's so good and I want to talk about it, but it's not quite right. Like they're always not quite. Like I'll give you the examples. Like the New York Times just bought Wordle,
I saw that.
right? And I'm just fascinated by this, right? Because I'm fascinated by how that little startup went from like nothing to like getting bought for like low seven figures by the New York
Yeah.
Times
Yeah.
in like a couple of months, right? But I didn't quite have the time for it this week. But I look at that and say like that's a cool entrepreneurial journey, and there's like the play of the way the New York Times is thinking about customer acquisition and retention and diversification. Like, it's a cool, interesting story. It just didn't quite meet my bar. But maybe it should have, right? Because I just did the whole explanation now to you. I have this, like, why. But that's where you go, like, I get to do that every day. I get to sit and look at these stories and make some decisions around trends and try and put some value into hey, what does the IT services delivery person need to know from the things that I just looked at, where I'm only going to ask 5, maybe 6 minutes of their time.
Hmm.
That makes you cut things fast.
I see. Very interesting. And what motivates you?
Uh what motivates me? Like in life, you mean,
Yeah, just
or like
generally.
I like to have fun. I
Right.
freely admit that I like to have fun. I like doing things that engage my brain, that are fun. That's why I play video games, right? Like it's because
Mm.
like it engages my brain. It's problem solving, and it's great fun. That's why I like to travel, right? Because it's great fun, and I learn, and I'm engaging stuff, and I'm trying new things. So I'm distinctly motivated by finding fun. it's
Mm,
and I look at it from that perspective: is what can I do that's good fun? And I think that there's a certain, if and not everything is always fun. You have to do some things that are unpleasant.
yeah.
But if you can at
Yeah.
least try and find the joy in even monotonous stuff, it makes life in general a lot better. So what
Mm,
motivates me? Like, I don't know, having some fun. Maybe the secondary bit is like being a good person, like
mm,
being a good husband, like being a good friend, like being a good sibling, or like these are things also, like if I can, I don't know, make a little dent in the world a little bit by trying to be positive or trying to find something good, like that's a nice way to live too.
yeah. And all those things that you mentioned are fun.
Yeah, they're
And
fun.
they are fun. Yeah. Yeah. And how do you measure success, Dave?
Ah, it's got a couple of different things, and it's changing, right? Like it's so I'm 46, right? So I'm in that middle, you're in that middle age bit, right? You're starting to think of like, well, what do I want to do with my life? What do I want my life to mean? Uh, and I think I don't want to be too crass, but I want to recognize that, like, hey, money is a measurement, right?
Yeah.
Like, because there's a certain amount required to open up possibilities.
Right.
And there's all the studies, right, that say you have to have a certain amount of money to meet your basic needs. Happiness continues to grow until you hit a certain point, right? And then it
Mm,
doesn't grow at the same linear bit. So you got to hit that. And I look at money as the ability to measure certain elements of my success. Uh, I don't mind saying that I also do measure reach and as like an impact.
mm,
Uh, for me, it's an element of like, how am I measuring the successes? Well, am I able to help people, right? Like, because I do my podcast because I think like, well, I have a voice that I think is helpful. I have some insight that I think can be helpful. The best way to measure that is reach, right? Like, what's my ability to reach the right people? So I do obsess a little bit over the stats on the numbers to try and make
do
sure
you
that, like, well,
really?
am I doing my bit? Because I look at it and say, if the number's growing, I'm delivering some value because
Mm,
people continue to engage and it grows. So I measure it that way. I measure it intangibly based on feedback. God, I love feedback. I love people telling me that they listen and what they liked, what they
mm,
didn't like. Like I love it. Like I live for it. Is, uh,
hmm,
and then
interesting.
so I measure it in those kinds of ways, and then I ultimately also kind of measure it from elements of feedback too, with the intangible bits, like from people that tell me like it made a difference, or that they tell me the story of where something I did helped, or just even being a good person, right? Like if friends tell me like that they appreciated me, or that I helped them, or they like hanging out with me, or whatever like that. Like I feed on that kind of stuff. I always quipped once, like, I did community and engagement for a long time, and I had a long list of measurements, of course, when I was a vendor. But I told my top boss once, I was like, guys like me don't do what we're doing if we don't want to be liked. Like, we don't
Mm,
run around and talk to people and get on stages and present stuff if we don't want to be liked. And so I always am self-aware enough to know that that is a measurement too.
very interesting, Dave. Great insight. Never asked you those questions before, and great answers. Thanks for your time today, man. Always great riffing with you. I hope we can make it a regular thing. And great advice for MSPs and for vendors, small business
Hey,
owners.
Joe, thanks for having me on. I love talking. Like, I'm also quipping. I'm self-aware. Look, I'm a guy in my basement. Like, I'm just trying to provide some insights. I really hope they're valuable. Like, it's but I'm not so inflated to sort of think that like I have all the answers. Like, I sometimes quip. I just have to be right more often than I'm wrong. Uh,
That's it.
and I like to think that with good data and good thinking, I can achieve that. Like, I can be right a lot more often than I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Uh, but I also don't necessarily recognize it. Like, yeah, I swing and miss too. Uh, but if you're so safe and you never take the risk and you don't miss, then you're not really trying, right? You got to be
Mm.
right. You got to be wrong sometimes if you want to really try. So,
But
but thank you for having me. These are great fun.
I really, you've become though a main, speaking point of our industry. You've become a stable, and I've always respected you, but you've really continued. I mean, how long have you doing business of tech?
I was just looking. It's 2 years and 4 months now. Uh,
Wow. Wow.
it's a good long time. Yeah, 2 years and 4 months.
It's 28 months. Wow. And
It's
every
it's
day, everybody,
it's a real thing. Like I always laugh. Like
it
I
is.
sometimes I wake up and I'm like, this is a real business. It's a real
It is.
thing. Like
It's a real
it's
thing.
and I pinch myself because I legitimately am having an awful lot of fun, and I'm just appreciative that people value it, and they're getting insights out of it. And I really always say, like, I hope that I produce content and people go out and make a ton of money. Like I hope
Mm.
that they go out and they like solve customer problems and they like get insights, and I hope that they're making a ton of money. And I also hope they tell me like both about it, or they tell me where I'm wrong too, because you can't learn and get better if I don't hear where I'm wrong. So
Some feedback. Yeah. And so, how can we listen to you? If you're not, you need to listen to Business of Tech. But how can we get in touch with you, Dave?
I am easy to find. The podcast is on all the podcatcher platforms. All the links are at businessof.tech. There's a big blue button. You can find it on all the audio podcatchers. If you like video, there's a video version on YouTube. All my social information is there. You can find me online. I respond to everything. My Twitter, my LinkedIn, my Facebook, they're all available. My email, I am not hard to find. All the links are businessof.tech.
Very good. Yeah, that dot tech has become very, very popular.
It's such a good URL, especially when your show
Yeah.
is the business of tech. Businessof.tech was a perfect URL for me.
Ah, very good. Dave, thanks so much for your time today. I appreciate it. And I hope we get to see each other soon, face to face, eventually this year.
I'm looking forward to it. Thanks, Joe.
Be well. Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypins.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Would you like to financially support the podcast? You can go to our Patreon site. Consider $5, $10, or $20 a month. There's all kind of plans that we have there. There's like a one-time payment. What is this podcast episode worth to you? $25, $50, $100, $500, $1,000, $5,000. You be the judge. You can go to our PayPal account to do that as well. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations.